Hello, and welcome to PRISM. PRISM is a design-oriented podcast hosted by me, Dan Harden. Like a glass prism that reveals the color hidden inside white light, this podcast will reveal the inside story behind innovation, especially the people that make it happen. My aim is to uncover each guest's unique point of view, their insights, their methods, or their own secret motivator, perhaps, that fuels their creative genius. Welcome, everyone, to Sustainable by Design, a materials wake-up call. My first guest is Jonsara Ruth. Jonsara is co-founder and design director of Healthy Material Lab at Parsons School of Design, where she serves as an associate professor and the founding director of the MFA Interior Design program. And as a designer, Jonsara has led creative and production teams to mass produce the healthiest and most environmentally friendly furniture available in the United States. Elevating everyday human experience is her underlying pursuit. Rico is an assistant professor of the practice in the Department of Forest Biomaterials. Assistant Professor Ruffino is a member of the Industrial Design Society of America and the Sustainable Furnishings Council, and he's actively involved in various working groups exploring sustainability within the furnishings industry as well. His numerous degrees in design and education has helped him produce a sustainable design and testing service center that aids companies in creating and testing sustainable product development. Thank you both for joining us.
Great to be here, Dan. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
I wanted to start with just a series of 4 quick slides. Let everybody read these. These kind of go without saying, but I wanted to set the context, almost like a thesis for our discussion, as kind of a platform for us to begin talking about these topics. I thought this one particular quote was funny. Plastic will be the main ingredient of all our grandchildren's recipes. I don't quite know what that's supposed to mean, other than the fact that plastic is flowing in our veins as we speak. Most of us anyway. There's a new study that just came out that 80% of us have plastic flowing in our veins. There's plastic molecules, PET, polypropylene, polyethylene, as we speak. This kind of goes without saying, but it also goes against the premise of what a lot of us designers are all about. We are constantly striving to get our good ideas out into the field, doing their fine work by providing solutions to end users. And yet the paradox as designers is, well, it's also damaging the environment. So that's something we should try to discuss today too. Yeah, well, this is clear as well. Longevity of plastics, it is so fleeting. Our society just consumes experiences and products so quickly that after the original use or maybe a dozen usages, we tend to dispose of them, and that's got to stop. And this is kind of a design maxim, the principle of reduction, reuse, repair, rebuilt, etc. If it doesn't offer these things, they really should not go to production. So these 4 slides are meant to be kind of prompts for both of you, Rico and Jonsara. So what are your general perspectives on the topic before we dive more into the problems that the world is facing with materials especially? I know it's a biggie.
I mean, it's a paradox, really, right? I mean, it's like, I know that a lot of my students have felt this kind of existential crisis. Like they come to design school wanting to create something new, then learn about all of these big issues, and then think like, why am I creating anything new at all? What am I doing in this discipline, in this field of design? Like, I mean, I know that as a designer, I felt that. I came across that kind of, after a bunch of years in practice, I thought, holy cow, what are we doing? We're just creating new things for this planet that no one needs. And then a colleague of mine said, can't we just live with, we never need to buy anything new. We have enough stuff on this planet to last all of us lifetimes. So, it is a big, big question. And when you pull in the issue of climate change and how much materials are contributing to the warming climate, as well as to the ill health of people, as well as to the waste issue, it does get to be an existential crisis in a way as a designer. But, I do believe that there are ways that we can be super innovative and creative around these subjects. So I guess that's a little personal and professional feeling.
I agree with John Saris. It is, we're like stewards of this planet. We need to take care of this planet. We only have one. And, I want a place for my kids to play and live, and for their children to, experience the same experiences I had growing up. It's very sad. And I didn't have a real wake up call to this sort of issue until my daughter presented it to me about, I gave her one day, I gave her a drink, a Starbucks drink, because she just had a procedure done, and it had a straw. And she was going crazy about, why did I give her a straw? I'm like, what are you talking about? And she's like, this is harming the turtles, because it ends up going in the oceans and then hurting the sea life. And I'm like, then she went through this whole process of how to take apart the straw and cut it up, and you got to split it down the middle, and hopefully it won't go in the ocean. If it does go in the ocean, it won't harm the sea life as much. Now, knowing more about that, the microplastics still are bad, but that was kind of my wake up call, and that we need to start doing more. And I truly believe that this can be accomplished through our line of work, through design.
I'd like to really discuss solutions like that. We'll get to that. I find myself pretty frustrated about this topic, and have for a long time, because so many of our clients, and I've been designing products for, well over 3 decades. And I can tell you, I would say close to 95% of our clients say, help us sell more product. That's your primary objective, designer. Strategize a plan for business success. And our definition of prosperity is high volume of whatever you're designing. And the measure of your success, designer or consultant, is achieving higher revenue by creating higher demand, and therefore higher volume of things that are often manufactured using plastics, some of which, I'm going to guess, unbeknownst to me at the time, were harmful to the environment, harmful to the end user. But oftentimes designers don't have knowledge at their fingertips, so we're not connected to that decision, that final decision by the time your design solution gets to the factory, where you even have any say in it at all as a designer. But we should be the voice that says, hey, wait a minute, if we're going to look out for the outcome of the end user above and beyond the income for our client, we have to make a stand and a statement. And we have to provide, I think, information to even the engineers and marketing folks and CEOs of these companies that I think they owe it to the world, that, and especially if they're going to be a brand that they can be proud of, they need to take a higher responsibility. Without trying to get too depressing, I want to look like, Jonsara, if we could jump into some slides that you provided that really address, what are some of these, what is the issue with these materials that us designers have been using and specifying for a long, long time?
Yeah. So a lot of our work at Parsons Healthy Materials Lab is fundamentally based on this statistic, which is we are the first generation to spend at least 90% of our time indoors, which is, hugely significant, because this is what we breathe the air indoors more than we breathe outside air, which is always like a call to get everybody to go outside. But also is, that the air inside now is known by toxicologists and others to be 3 to 5 times more polluted than outdoor air. The thing is that with our choices of building products and materials and furnishings, we're bringing a lot of invisible things into the spaces that we don't even know what they are. We don't even know what materials are made of. So, most designers don't even know to even ask what something is made of. It's just, this is all kind of new knowledge. And so the issue is that the materials that are used, like you're saying, Dan, like the plastics that you use that even feel good, or furniture that we make, are becoming part of our biological systems. And that's been proven. And you said that at the very beginning, that now there's this new report that came out last week that 80% of human beings have plastics in their blood. And that's not a natural thing.
And
So
we don't really know what it's doing to us.
we
right?
don't. I mean, there's now more evidence, and that's kind of the crux of the work of our work at Healthy Materials Lab. That we're starting to understand what the ingredients are. The issue is, that these things are becoming part of our biological systems and kind of wreaking havoc on our systems. This is how it's happening. It's like there's off-gassing from materials that continues. Some plastics do continue to off-gas over time. Some stop after they've kind of emitted. But then there's this particulate dust. Some materials aren't static. They wear down and the dust gets into the air. And then there are chemical additives to make things feel softer or make them stain repellent or fire resistant. And those additives are often not bound to whatever that material is. And so they release into the air and we breathe them in. And so this is how they get into our bodies, that we can, most of the time we breathe them in through the air, but we can also ingest them, like particles, like kind of very nano, microscopic particles of these chemicals can cling to dust, and that dust clings to our food and we eat it. Or children who are most vulnerable just crawl around the floor and then put their hands in their mouth and get things through their mouth that way. Or it can be absorbed through your skin, dermal absorption. And this is the issue, which is that a lot of the ingredients in building materials are now kind of proven to be linked to these variety of diseases, human diseases. Cancer is a horrific one, but there are also things like asthma and neurodevelopmental disorders, autism or ADHD, or even reproductive disorders, which is Dr. Shauna Swan wrote about this, that there's like a real decline in sperm count. There's a real decline in the ability to conceive children. And this is linked to chemicals that are called endocrine disruptors, but they're found in a lot of plastics. This is just an example. Phthalates and bisphenols are additives to plastics. Phthalates make plastics soft and bisphenols make plastics hard. So phthalates are found in a lot of, like shower curtain is a great example. It's full of phthalates. That's one thing you could do. You could just get rid of the shower curtain. If you have one of those clear plastic shower curtains, you can get rid of that.
And it's often it's that soft vinyl. You can smell it even when you open up a vinyl shower curtain or anything quite like that. Certain bags are made of it as well. I mean, it's so evident that it's wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, just your senses are telling you this already.
Exactly. And so these are some of the health ailments that are associated. And, Dr. Swan is an epidemiologist. I mean, this is coming from scientific medicine, peer-reviewed papers. There's a lot of reason to trust this evidence. We look at a lot of the building materials that are used to make buildings and, make interiors and make buildings. And we look to see what kinds of substances are contained in these materials. And then we can see that, like the glues that are used in plywood, for instance, often contain formaldehyde, which are high VOC. So we look to reduce and avoid these harmful chemicals that are in building materials and find viable, affordable alternatives that are more benign. So as you were saying, Dan, like we're surrounded by plastics, and plastics are really petrochemically derived materials, but they are also the highest growth material on the planet. Like this is where there's all this new invention and production. And the real crux of the issue, that we assume that all of these materials are, somehow tested for safety, that anything's on the market that we buy must have been tested by somebody for safety, but that's not the truth. That in the United States, out of like 85,000 or even 100,000 chemicals that are out there, only 250 have been tested, and only 5 of those chemicals have been restricted by law.
That is incredible.
Unbelievable. And then there's 60,000 chemicals that have been just grandfathered in because there's nobody to test them. So they just, let's just grandfather. And as toxicologists are doing this research, we're finding that these are responsible for a lot of diseases that people are suffering.
Is the innovation in these material fields, is it happening just so fast that the regulators can't keep track of it?
Exactly.
Because what I find on like this front end of when we're trying to innovate on our product, there's so many very specialized plastics that do certain things really, really well. So if you're designing a product that, has to be, underwater its whole life, or, in the sun its whole life, or an extreme performance expectation or a certain functionality, plastics are getting more and more vertical in the offering when it comes to performance. And to designers and engineers, that's a good thing, right? You can improve the performance or the outcome of the product, the way it works, if you're specifying a very specialized new kind of plastic. Like I remember when certain nylons came out, even the way Herman Miller was using a lot of rhinite and all these polymers that were nylon based. But as those came out, the performance metrics were offered to us, but not necessarily these deleterious effects that end up being a problem now.
That's definitely true. It's definitely true. And, it's a system failure in the United States. It's not true in every country. In the EU, it's the reverse. Like you're not allowed to use a new material until it's been tested. And then, there's different regulations there that help like prohibit something that's very harmful for our bodies to get out there on the market, no matter what its performance aspects are. But in the US, it's the reverse. I heard this story that, the chemicals or the new inventions get into the queue, but if they can't keep up. And if they can't test it within 6 weeks or so, it just leaves the desk and is allowed to go out there into the world instead of the reverse. Like, let's not let it go out there into the world unless we've reviewed it for human health, which is what happens in Europe. So regulations are not keeping up with us, and which is why it lies on the shoulders of designers and architects to find out what's in the product and should we really use it. Which to your point, when you find a highly performative material, you want to use it because you have a deadline and you need to get that product designed and out there and in production. There's all these pressures. So it's difficult, no doubt. It's definitely difficult. The next issue, is the climate change issue, really. Like the current greenhouse gas emissions from plastics, from the life cycle of plastics, from like the raw origin of petroleum, all the way through the production, the refining of plastics and into the production, is threatening our ability to meet the climate goals. That actually, like, plastics is fossil fuel. Like, we are actually emitting carbon every time we use plastics. And this report just came out. This is all this stuff about plastics is just coming out in huge amounts. But in October of 2021, just now, this report from Beyond Plastics suggests that plastics production will release more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere than coal plants, which is what we've been fighting for all these years. That coal, plastics will become the new coal, is what they're saying, by 2030, which is only like 8 years away.
At what point during the production of, I'm guessing what you're saying is when you're producing raw plastic, the actual material, when you're making the material.
Exactly.
That's when the harm is done.
Exactly. And all the way through the process, because, you have to refine the fossil fuel. It's a raw material. Rico, maybe you could help me on this, but it's a raw material, non-renewable resource that then gets refined in these refineries, or it goes through a cracker plant. It's fracked and then goes through these cracker plants, and it gets refined into molecules that we can use to make plastic. So that whole process emits enormous amounts of carbon. And then we go into kind of the mixing of the chemistry and the production, which also takes energy and fuel to run. And that's more emissions. And then we transport it, and that's more emissions. I mean, it just continues and continues. And then, you mentioned before that what happens at the end of its life is ridiculous. But this next statistic on the next slide is just kind of floors me, which is, of all of the greenhouse gas emissions in the world, if you looked at the pie chart of where are they coming from, where is this climate change happening? 31% of greenhouse gas emissions is related to making stuff, just the making of things. This is a carpet manufacturer, but it could be the making of anything. 31%. And it's like all this stuff that we make is just contributing. That's like almost a third of the greenhouse gas emissions because we're just producing new stuff.
You know, I love and hate this at the same time. Industrial designers, especially, and engineers listening here, it should be like what we call a wake-up call. It doesn't mean that you have to stop making stuff, throw your arms up and say, well, I can't do this. It means you have to do a better job at it and help to reduce this percentage, because people will need stuff. Do we need as much stuff as we currently think we do? No. But focus on quality instead of quantity. I mean, I think for me, that's a big message. It makes me kind of a little, angrier and angrier over my career, about this and other problems that we're causing by the production of so much stuff. But it is possible through good design, problem solving, and design thinking, whatever your mantra is, to start to address this. It is achievable.
It is. I mean, it is. And we can start to think about using renewable resources, not non-renewable. So I think that's the newest. I think that's probably regenerative, actually. Regenerative materials are the best. This is an example, actually, of what you could do with plastic. I mean, I love, Parley for the Oceans is kind of amazing, where they've really taking that ocean plastic, harvesting it, reconstructing it into usable pellets. This is all recycled plastic, and then refining it and spinning it into plastic thread, and then making new stuff out of old stuff. And so this is a great example. That thread gets used by Adidas to make shoes, and all these different companies are using, I don't know, I have tote bags made out of it. I mean, I think you can use it to make all kinds of textiles from the trash. And, we couldn't have done this 100 years ago. We have new technology that's allowing us to process this stuff. I'm sure it takes energy to do. I'm sure, there's greenhouse gas emissions from this process, but at least we're radically reducing, to your point, we're radically reducing. And this is a great innovation by Parley to say, let's harvest that ocean plastic, remake it into a usable pellet and spin it into a usable yarn.
Yeah. And if the cost metrics are there, of course, everything has to make economic sense, the way that our capitalist construct even works. Right. So maybe as designers, we can even help with this whole process of thinking creatively about, okay, let's use our imagination about how to harvest waste material like that, and then make it more cost effective.
Yeah.
Because everything will come down. I know that when we try to pitch certain either alternative materials or sustainability solutions that involve more of a process or a service to our clients, if it doesn't fall within their cost parameters, sometimes it's thrown out. And that's frustrating. Right. It's really frustrating because they'll always fall back to virgin plastic.
I mean, that's the other thing. The people who are living near the factories, that one of those grasses in that plastics is the new coal, which you can get at the Beyond Plastics website, shows the amount of people that are being affected by plastics production, the amount of people who are contracting cancers of all kinds of crazy sorts just because they live next door to these plastic manufacturing. So so we're sourcing virgin plastics and it's out of sight, out of mind. But all these people who can't afford to move from their houses that are living right next to these refineries and the factories are dying at age 45 because of our plastics consumption. Is that fair? So I don't know how we get these, larger companies to realize the impact of their decisions on other communities. But that's really important. And I don't know if, our feeling is designers could bring those issues up in conversations with clients, certainly.
Yeah, for sure. Was that a resource you'd recommend, the beyondplastics.org?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. I know that, Rico, you spend a lot of time on this, looking at various processes and material selection criteria. Would you like to give us some insights there?
Yeah, it goes back to trying to incorporate a different line of thinking in your design process, if you will. So how you look at the problem, and you should think about sustainability from the beginning. And even at the beginning phase of empathy and asking the right questions, and you can ask some of your clients, and you know, are they mindful, or do they know what certain materials are doing, and do they care about the product and where its end of life is? But part of that is building it into that process, is looking for the way we utilize different materials, what's going your sustainable inputs, your sustainable outputs, and what are the resting implications within that design. So if you look at sustainable inputs, is like what Jonsara just said, is all the different materials. What are the types of materials you can use? What are more sustainable materials? Now, the Healthiest lab at Parsons is a great resource. I also like to use Materials Connection that tells us in depth what is in those materials that you want to use and source. But as a designer, we need to do the research on those materials. But beyond materials, is you need to think about how it is being put together.
I think this is a really good point, because even in a standard design process, we actually will typically say, well, yeah, that's going to be wood or plastic or sheet metal or what have you. But there are so many different kinds of plastic and alternatives to plastics. I think you just spend more time on it. I was recently working on a chair, and my go-to for this particular seat and seat back was plastic. And I forced myself to just really go back and rethink everything. And it led to a much better solution. It's not out yet, but I think this should be applied. This kind of thinking, and a more broad input, as you call it, should go into everything that we touch.
Yeah, considering the number of parts within your assembly, how much energy is being used for all that. The more parts, the more energy, right? In order to make it. So thinking about those aspects, trying to eliminate the number of parts, maybe simplifying design is I think another key element, and figuring out who does it product really serve, and how can it be streamlined. I tend to ask a lot of questions and promote people to think deeply about what they're doing. For example, we all go shopping, right? So has anyone ever used the scan and go, where you scan your product and then you pay for it because your phone? Everyone has their phone. They have an app. They have their credit card tied to. Most people have their credit card tied to their phone. So as you scan, you pay, and then you can leave. How many other things does that eliminate in that streamlined process? What are the outputs? Does your product disassemble? Is it designed for disassembly? How long does it last, and does it have a life beyond its first? So going to the disassembly, I just got finished with my students doing a upholstered chair for Sustainable Furnishings Council for High Point, where we used a whole bunch of sustainable materials, and we designed this chair for disassembly. And what happens is all the arms, the legs, the back, the seat, all come apart. But not only that, each material separates on its own down to this base material. So the cushions all together, the fabrics all together, the springs. So, and the point is, this all can be taken apart, and then it can be, if needed, reused. You can also recycle it if wanted, or reordered. So if your sofa breaks and say the springs are shot, okay, you can call the company, get some new springs, take it down, take apart your chair, throw in a new set of springs, and those materials.
But the designer is responsible to innovate on a much deeper level. Don't just make that chair or couch beautiful with the right colors and textiles, but go deeper than that, is what you're saying.
Correct. It's a little bit of our ethical responsibility as designers to do something along these lines, because why? It's better for the environment.
What do you do in the case of, I don't know, let's take some, we do a lot of consumer electronic devices, right? They have a life, a planned life.
Okay.
They have planned obsolescence. And for many reasons. One is the technology keeps upgrading, getting better and better. You know, who hasn't been in a situation where I bet a lot of you have stood in lines at the Apple store when the new iPhone comes out, you know. Do you really need one? Probably not. The other thing is we work a lot with, marketing executives who are basically saying, you know what, you guys did a great job on that product that you designed 2 years ago, but now we're going to obsolete it because we need a fresh new input. We need to, we've noticed a drop off in sales. We need another one. We need the next great thing. It's been frustrating because, we'll often try to, like almost every designer, I'm going to guess is listening right now, you try to do the very best job that you can. You want to create the ultimate whatever it is you're designing. And then a couple years go by, that client, if you do a really great job, that client's going to come back and they're going to like, okay, outdo yourself, do it again, make it even better. And so these things end up in the dump. I can't tell you many things I've literally seen in dumps when I've renovated homes where I'm like, oh my God, I worked on that. I'll see it in the dump. I've seen computers that I've worked on, back in the 90s in the dump. And it's kind of scary. It's talk about a wake-up call. That's scary. I don't know. You can hear it in my voice. I'm frustrated by this fact.
I would look at what can be, out of those components, what can be salvaged and can they all disassemble to be reused into the next generation?
It all depends on what it is. There's an awful lot of products out there where a lot of people say, well, what are you going to do with that old HP printer? Are you going to ask people to take it apart? I wish the designers had done a better job in making it possible to actually, and maybe even fun, to take apart and reuse.
But if it was designed for disassembly and say they were completely obsolete, but if it was designed for disassembly down to its base components or materials, then you can at least recycle it.
Yeah, but you have to have affordances in your design that allow people to do that. Because go try to take an HP printer apart. It's not easy. Yeah,
it's
I'm not picking on HP,
but yeah.
There's a lot of products in our world that are, I've got one of these little blender bullet things, and the motors was doing some funky sound this morning. I've got to replace it.
Yeah.
Should I take it apart? It's got a lot of aluminum, stainless steel, and plastic in it. And I looked at it. Well, I'll know how to take it apart because I'm a designer. And so, but most people will be like, "Oh, this is intimidating. I can't do it." But we can think different as designers to build that solution into your design.
Remember, like carbon. What are they called? Carbon washers. Carbon for the motor. There was there's like a spring and a piece of carbon and it.
Oh, yeah, the brushless motors. Yeah.
Yeah, you replace the carbon. It like wears down, and then you get new, and then like the motor lasts for a really long time as long as the housing is cast aluminum and you can take it apart and put it back together, and you still see them in the flea markets. They're still around. They're not in the garbage.
So the question would be, what are the wearable parts? What parts are really wearing down on those types of products that you can focus on designing for replacement?
Yes, but I think the bigger challenge is shifting values, like to get people to understand, like, this is a good thing to do. And by the way, it might even be fun. You might even learn something when you do it. Like that kind of mentality, I think, as far as when it comes to like taking things apart and putting them back together, it doesn't really exist in our society today. We live in a disposable society. But we are, as we destroy our infrastructure and our planet, we will be forced to get back to repairable shoes and repairable electronics and repairable ... So there's
hopefully.
No doubt.
Well, I mean, hopefully, unless we just like fill our planet with garbage and then we all live in landfills and have plastic in our blood and sperm counts go down and we kill our own species.
Don't you think it's
like, that's how I'm feeling lately. Like,
right.
Oh,
I know.
Okay.
But don't you think it's a growing trend
we
that everyone's being more aware of the problems that we're discussing? Like sustainability is becoming a little bit more of a term that everyone knows, or at least getting to know.
Yeah. I think that's the key, Rico, is to build the awareness, rebuild the value so that we understand the impact that we're having. And then designers can better communicate, not only through the product solution, but communicate the value and the packaging and the messaging and the branding, the storytelling, all the other things that designers do around the actual product, which is causing the problem. It's describing and helping to promote more sustainable thinking on the part of the consumer, because it's the consumer at the end of the day that makes that decision to make that purchase and to consume and discard the product after all. So
there's also these cool, new design ideas coming. There's these Italian designers called Studio Forma Fantasma. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they're doing all of this. All their products are from electronic waste recycling.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah,
Awesome.
to your point of like, what do we do with electronic waste? Then there's these new kind of mining, like urban mining happening of like, oh, I'll use that stuff and make things out of gold, out of those little electronic parts. And maybe there's new ways to think about what are the materials that we're using as the raw material.
What are some of the more interesting raw materials and alternatives, especially to plastic, that you guys have seen?
Well, I don't know, Rico, you're doing a lot in wood, right?
Well, I'm always a fan of wood. I think wood's pretty versatile. It could be structural, it could be decorative. It can do a lot of different things. And the great thing about wood is that that you grow more. You can grow more trees. Bamboo grows pretty rapid. There's other plant species that go pretty rapid. And I've seen even studies where they're doing using wood as making it more translucent, so you can put it on products and see things through it. Or maybe one day it could be used in structures from home to make different office buildings or office areas or parts of your home more wood panelings that you can almost see through. So wood has a lot of potential for different aspects. It's not as formable as plastic, but it's very workable.
How can you be assured that these are sustainable forests? Every day you read something about the Amazon disappearing, and
research where your materials are being sourced and how they're being sourced, and if they're meeting all of the appropriate standards.
Okay, well, how do I tell my client that might produce 10,000 plastic electronic products a week, and some of them do? I want you guys to use wood.
You would have to make the pitch to the company how that is more beneficial, big picture, I think. And there could be a cost difference, and I'm sure there would be. Plastics versus wood. I bet the cost would probably go up because plastic is pretty cheap. But you would have to make a big picture pitch that they would have to get behind because they want to do something better for the environment. And I think it's a good step in the right direction for them as a business to do so.
What I think also that's happening here is, and I want to hear what you think, Dan, but there's a lot of new research going into making materials out of algae, for instance, or out of mycelium, which is the undergrowth of mushrooms, or out of bacterial cellulose, or using different kinds of bacteria to grow new things that are completely biodegradable and regenerative. Like parts of moss and seaweed and eelgrass and hemp plants and all the different plant genre that's being used and really being tested in the laboratory to figure out how to create new stuff. We're doing a deep dive into mycelium this semester, and we have all these new samples in the library. I just saw one today that looks like it's even more luxurious than leather, and it's mushrooms, it's fungi.
Oh wow, cool.
It's so cool. I mean, it's so exciting what's happening in the material science world of regenerative materials. It's not quite there yet, though. So for the 10,000 plastic parts, Dan, could you ever have the conversation with them to say, here's the impact that you're having on the world? Is that something?
Try. Yes, we try. Some clients are are open and they want to do the right thing. They're like, just help us find it, help us source it, and develop the processes that allow us to produce it fast enough. In regard to these alternative materials, as a designer, I love finding a new material and then designing for that material. Sometimes the actual material and the processes to produce that material are often the first read of a design. That's where the innovation is. We've all been, you guys are in the furniture industry, you sit in chairs that are made of certain materials where that's the joy of that experience. It just feels great. It's different. It looks beautiful as a result. These new materials allow you as a designer to differentiate not only in the sustainability factors, but also they can be beautiful. Mm-hmm. The things that we typically think about design when you want to create a beautiful form and, well, just a piece of beauty to begin with. The material can actually give you more options, a lot more options.
Yeah.
And a possibility to really make your design shine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like one of the new statistics, again, that's out just 2022, a couple months ago, is that more than 50% of the ocean plastic, microplastics that are in the ocean come from paint. Paint.
Really?
Yeah. And it's like our house paint, but it's also industrial paints. Like paint makes up more than 50% of microplastics in the ocean. So one of the things that we've been looking at for a long time is like, what's an alternative? Because plastic paints, even just in our houses, aren't just a waste problem. It's a toxic problem for all different reasons, for all the additives they're putting in that paint, not to mention the greenhouse gas emissions of paint. So we've been looking at minerals, for instance, and it goes right. Mineral-based paints are not only healthier, better for the environment, better for the air that we breathe indoors, but it's beautiful. I mean, the way that light reflects or like is absorbed on a lime-based or a mineral-based, clay-based paint is like, it's so beautiful. It just makes the room different. It feels different. It looks different. It's more beautiful, I think. Wow. And so I think you're right. I think that some materials change everything.
Yeah.
It seems like there should be more organizations that bring together material scientists and designers so that material scientists have an objective, because designers know how to create that demand because they really understand the psychology of, perception and consumption, all the patterns around what creates demand. But material scientists are better at what can be done, especially on a micro level, like what you're just talking about. That paint's a great example of that. Maybe there are these organizations, maybe we should start one that bring these two fields more closely together.
That's a great idea.
I think so. I mean, I think but you're pointing out the big issue is how do we get these large companies who rely on production, on quantity in order to make their company work?
Yeah.
What if you were to tell them that the toxicity issues with their children or with their own families, would that get to them? The fact that obesity is linked to plastics or that neurodevelopment, do we get to them through their personal lives in the way that you talked about in the beginning?
Yeah, some of them maybe, but there's too much of a look the other way mentality with most corporations because, they're beholden to the shareholders. They're looking for, some kind of growth quarter to quarter. And and then here comes a designer with a crazy idea, a dream to, make more sustainable products. But maybe we just have to become more forceful as designers.
I think that's the next frontier, actually, is to address that because, to address those boards, their decisions are actually contributing to all of this, and they're not exempt. They're not excused from the issues because their own bodies are affected. And I think that's, the toxic problem is a personal problem, whereas the environmental problem is such a huge issue, but it doesn't feel personal to lots of people. My backyard is beautiful. Where I live is gorgeous. I don't
Well,
need.
because it doesn't happen, these effects right away. It's over time. So, everyone experiences things in the now. So if it's not happening
that's
now,
human nature.
right? Oh, it's gonna, 20 years down the road, I'll be fine. Well, they don't understand the long-term effect or the big picture. But us three voices here it's going to be hard pressed to make the change. We all have to band together. Like you said before, all the designers, we all need to kind of be on the same page.
It's very true. And I think a lot of the evidence is coming forward. The same way that, the tobacco industry, I remember when I was a kid, smoking was relatively okay. It really wasn't too bad for you. My parents smoked. And over the ensuing couple of decades, it became very obvious. I think with plastic, it's kind of the same, but we're now being presented with evidence like you brought forth, Jonsara, a few minutes ago. We need to get that out in front of the corporations, our clients, the decision makers on materials. And I think a lot of designers need to be brave enough to say, you know what, and me included, I have to do a bigger part. I admit that sometimes when our client will say, okay, well, it's got to be plastic, we kind of go along with it. And I think we have to really try a lot harder. I think I'm speaking on behalf of a lot of industrial designers out there. Honestly.
I loved your suggestion last time we talked about making a router out of bamboo.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
why not?
I love that.
We did a product it was like a hub product for Google, and we were able to convince them to use bamboo for the shroud. And we found a supplier in China. There's a huge bamboo forest in China near Chengdu. And one of our designers went there to actually see it. And sure enough, it is sustainable. It's giant. And you can, almost anything you want made out of bamboo, it's there. And they produced quite a few of these bamboo routers. But they eventually went away from it because the bean counters came in. And they said, we can shave a couple bucks from this hub unit if we go back to plastic. And we tried fighting it, and sometimes the bean counters win. I mean, this is it's unfortunate, but it does happen. But we have to keep trying. You never want to give up. Why don't we jump to some questions? Our audience has a few questions, and then we can have any kind of closing remarks. I have one question here. How can designers evaluate if a material is actually sustainable or if it is just marketing jargon that only presents it as sustainable by only one metric? I feel like there are a lot of materials disguised as sustainable, and I'm curious about the actual impact of things such as bioplastics, etc.
In our work, the first thing that you do is ask for transparency. Like, what's it made of? The first thing, what is it made of? And that's how you can start to evaluate if it's sustainable or not. What are the components that make up this material of this product?
How is it sourced?
And how do you source? Right. And where does it come from? Where is it coming from? And how is it made? What kinds of emissions are required to make this product? Where did it get made?
Right.
Is it local or is it from the other side of the globe? And so it had to be transported across the world to get to you. These are some kinds of questions. And then once you know some of these answers and you have answers to the substances that are in that product, then you can evaluate those substances to understand whether those are, clean and safe or not so healthy. And there's a lot of, and third-party certifications are really important. Like cradle to cradle certification is really a good one. There are a lot of certifications that are not so good. So you really have to know which certifications are trusted and not. And that's also really important. But third-party certifications are really, really important. And declarations are really important. Like just declaring, if a company's willing to declare what's in their product, then you're one step closer to something that's a bit better. And then where does it go at the end of its life? Does it biodegrade? or does it stay on the planet for a millennium? you know, so these are all questions. I agree, Rico, like just asking these questions, which are almost just commonsensical after a while. I mean, you have to make a habit of it. You have to start asking these questions.
It would be nice if when you buy a product, it had like a type of barcode you can scan it and see what's in it, how sustainable it is. We all focused on food. Everyone sits there and reads the label. And you have this element in there that, but what if you can do that with products?
Yeah.
I would love that.
Yeah.
We should all carry around barcode scanners.
Exactly.
It doesn't even have to be a barcode, some sort of system that tells us whether or not that product I'm buying is sustainable, what level of sustainability does it have?
Yeah.
That's the other thing, consumers we just don't have that at our fingertips. They don't tell you.
No.
A lot of problem is, again, like the tobacco industry, they didn't tell us until they printed on the side of the cigarette pack that it's going to kill you.
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, for building products now, just in the last 7 years, there's this huge surge in transparency efforts. There's something called the Health Product Declaration. And that's just like it's kind of a nutrition label or ingredients label for building products. I want that for products, for, industrial design, for furniture. Like, shouldn't you just be able to read the label and it says, here's what we're made of? Not that hard. But then, a lot of manufacturers, and I don't know if you come across this in your work, but you don't even know who all the sub-suppliers are. You don't even know who all the suppliers are for the products you're making. So it's not even easy to make the list. Like, the ingredients list isn't so simple to produce because there's
we always think, forever, since the dawn of design, we think form, function, and usability and serviceability, but this level of understanding about what's actually going into that product to make it, I love that as a metric that you can measure as a consumer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then when you're designing, of course, there are best practices out there. A good material will often be tested and tried, and there is enough information on the internet where you can find those products that are genuine. It's hard to comb through so much information and data, and what do you trust anymore? But best practices will usually come to the surface after it has been tested. There are enough places you can go to find out whether or not something is truly genuine. Which brings me to this next question. Are there any reliable sources or lists out there about what companies and or material suppliers are genuinely practicing sustainability? Is there a network or a case-by-case inquiry? If not, then what should I look for in my research?
That's what we do on our website is we have something called tools and guides, and there's a ton of resources that are trusted, and we only put guides there that are trustworthy. So, and then there are other, of course, there's other resources out there that list these guides to make things healthier.
Can we, as a call to action to end this, maybe we could just put this on our Instagram, shared Instagram. Let's get Enrico, let's put something together so that this audience can go to, maybe put it on our website, my team, and let's make this more available to this audience and others that might want to see this recording.
Yeah, no, I like that, like a resource list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure that some already exist. I'm going to guess that the IDSA, I would hope, would have something like this, but let's go deeper with it.
Yeah, agreed.
I think that's great. Yeah.
Okay. Wonderful. I think we are about out of time. What a treat it was to talk to both of you.
It was a great conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a great conversation.
Yeah.
Thanks to everybody that's listened in. We'll see you next time. We like to do these events, I don't know, about once a quarter or something like that. So I'll look forward to the next one. But most importantly, Jonsara, thank you. Rico, thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a
Thank
pleasure.
you, Dan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Whipsaw.
Thank you for listening to PRISM. Follow us on whipsaw.com or your favorite streaming platform, and we'll be back with more thought-provoking episodes soon.
PRISM is hosted by Dan Harden, Principal Designer and CEO of Whipsaw. produced by Isabella Glenn and Sarah Lears. Mix and sound design by Eric Buell.